I have never been stronger. I've never been more confident in myself as a man and as a human. And I've never been more successful as an executive, as an entrepreneur, as a salesperson. And the reason why is because I embraced my emotions. I embraced the feminine side of me.
Hello, everybody. Welcome to another episode of the Webdelics Podcast, where we're on a journey to find out the truth about plant medicines and psychedelics, get rid of the myths, and change the narrative. I'm your host, Scott Mason, and with us today is a very special guest, Sabba Nazhand. Sabba, tell us a little bit about yourself.
Scott, first of all, so good to see you. And I'm so excited to be on the Webdelics podcast today. So excited. So a little bit about me. I'm a tech executive. I've been in tech for 20 years, from early stage startups all the way through multinational organizations. And I found myself shifting over to entrepreneurship. I'm in the process of launching a business and building a product in the psychedelic space. I advise for a handful of companies in the psychedelic space and also outside. And I'm part of a venture studio that helps companies essentially launch their go-to-market function from 0 to 1. And I have two amazing little kiddos, Oliver and Ava, and I live here in the DC area with my wife.
I love that you're talking about your kiddos, and we're going to find out all about how that relates to psychedelics as well as your professional life, because the theme of the day is 5MEO, how it can make you a better father and a better man.
Yes.
Wow. What a topic.
Goosebumps, really.
Yeah, I think anyone listening could imagine why I'm so excited about this episode and why this is going to be so pivotal to the history of our podcast. Let's talk a little bit, though, about who you are from the perspective of your personal background, because this ultimately plays into the story that you're about to share, as well as the thinking that you're about to bring into the room with us today. Sabba, you started your life in what you've described as war-torn Iran. Tell us a little bit about that and how on earth then you ended up in the tech world in Washington, D.C. I thought the twain would never cross.
Yeah. Got to take a breather here because there's layers to this. And I'll try to make this coherent. Growing up in a house where we were relatively had a normal life, aside from the struggles of like migrating to the US, my father working two jobs, my mother working a job, just like 7-Eleven, busboy, whatever it took to make money.
Yeah.
There was this level of, normalcy. I would run and go play outside, school, etc. However, there were undertones of trauma and distress and stress and stress in our life. The common themes at home growing up were foreign policy, naturally, right? Being from Iran, and that was on the news, on the TV 24/7. So watching my parents go through the distress and the trauma of watching their homeland and their family, who most of them are still there, and a lot of them have dispersed as well, going through that was really traumatic. Watching my parents go through the drama and that was, foreign policy was a big topic. Tennis, soccer, those were the two other topics that were more lighthearted. And then lastly, money and survival, and the struggle of earning money has been deep rooted in my family's trauma, and still is and deep rooted in my trauma and my relationship with money, which I'll talk about. So I grew up always listening to my parents worry about the next dollar, worry about how to pay bills, more jobs, etc. And so I had this very, very toxic relationship with money and career and work. I'm pausing because my parents went through a lot to give us a better life. And till this day, we've been in this country 30 something years. My parents lived middle class life.
Yes.
My dad almost every week calls me and says, "Son, I don't know what I'm going to do, how I'm going to pay the mortgage." Think about that what that happens to, I'm 42 years old now. I'm a
Mhm.
man. I can handle it now. But think about listening to those words almost every day for 40 years, for 30
Mhm.
years, what that does to a child. It
Mhm.
gives this level of like, I'm not good enough. I need to help my parents. Why are they struggling? So that created this young adult in me, this child who had lived two lives. One life, I was this like happy-go-lucky, everybody
Mhm.
liked me.
Mhm.
I was this nice guy. Behind closed doors, I was angry and I was pissed off at the world. And all I wanted was a deep connection to love and something bigger.
Mhm.
So these were like all these little pockets of how I grew my life. So how I live my life. So going to your question around work, I dropped out of school. I'm a college dropout. I dropped out of school because at the time I didn't think education was important, that I
Mhm.
needed to make money because of what I just explained now.
Right.
I dropped out of school. I started working. I tried to support my parents as much as possible, but it was more a selfish approach of like, I just need to make money. I don't care, and I need to prove to the world, to myself, to my parents that I can be successful. And that took me into a journey of many years of lack of self-confidence, toxic environments of jobs and work, just to make ends meet and make money, and feeling not good enough because I was not educated, quote unquote.
Mm.
And then I went into sales, and that completely changed my life. And I'll talk about how that transitioned into tech. I started in car sales, which is the grind of all grinds. And
Mhm.
what I learned from car sales was how to be presentable, how to be professional, how to talk to people who have money and get them to pay for very expensive cars. That gave me a level of like maturity. And I worked around a group of men, fathers, men who worked 15-hour days, did drugs, drank, um, infidelity, just overall weird environments. And I grew up thinking that's what manhood is like. That's what career and leadership is like. Luckily, I left car sales and I went into tech, and I found a job being a business development representative, literally making 100 calls a day, Monster Energy drinks, same kind of toxic environment, and
Mm.
that led me into this journey into the tech world, leadership. And I'll stop there for a second, but that's how I got myself to tech.
You're tapping into something that we have never explicitly raised on this show, although it has lurked in the background and on the sides. But thank you for providing the opportunity for us to uncover this nail and hit it on the head. Money.
Yes.
Money as a source of trauma. Like you, I have subconsciously, for much of my life, tied the ability to make money very tightly to my identity as a
Mm,
man. If I'm making it in my mind, particularly a lot of it, I'm successful. If I'm going through a down period, I'm unsuccessful. Neither of us are alone in this respect. Let's think about the stock market crashes that have happened. People kill themselves because of that. But when you think about who is jumping out of the window of that office tower because their bank account went from 20 million to zero overnight, what is the image that comes into the mind? It is a male in
yes.
a suit.
Yes.
What is a failure as a man, as often as not in popular culture? A man who cannot provide. And you're right, a money first environment doesn't necessarily have to be toxic. But
Right.
so many of the toxic environments that I've been in professionally that have fed into and amplified and made my own neuroses around being a man and a human being interacting in the world have been places that I ended up because of the pursuit of money, undergirded by this idea that I needed it to be a man.
Yes.
Interestingly enough, the tech world has a reputation, perhaps not the same as car sales industries, but for having a culture that, at least in some instances, furthers its own variant of toxic masculinity out. I don't need to go into a lot of detail except for those who might be listening down the road, but story after story about a lot of the app founders, or a lot of the tech-based traditional business disruptors, are full of stories of these frat stereotypical frat boy like atmospheres coming into a professional workplace. Was that what you experienced when you were in the tech world, or was it something different? How did that all play out? Just talk.
Oh, Scott, I am so triggered right now in a good way. Yeah, I was part of tech startups my whole career, from DC to Hong Kong to New York City. Um, I was part of these bro cultures where you work and you work, and then you go to happy hour and you drink your ass off, and then you do it again, rinse and repeat, and all that matters is how much money you can make, and that becomes your family.
Mm.
And it's so toxic because most of the leaders I worked with, now there were some great leaders I've worked with in the past that I honor and appreciate and I learned from, but there are leaders I work with that were so bad at being leaders. They were so toxic. A side note, I know now that they are just scared. They were scared little kids, and they didn't
Mm.
know any better, because of how they were brought up and what they thought was what you just said it means to be a man. But at the time, I looked up to them.
Yeah.
I looked up to these leaders because I wanted my father to be a different figure for me.
Yeah.
In my mind, he just hustled, and he wasn't this like entrepreneur tech, even though he's entrepreneur, he wasn't this like tech, big time, fancy suit entrepreneur that I wanted per se,
Mm-hmm.
that I thought I wanted. So I looked at these tech leaders, these CEOs, as father figures. And that, when I realized that, and plant medicine helped me realize that, it shattered me. Um, these were the environments that I was in. You just drank, you did drugs, and you just worked hard. And all it was about was how much money you can make, how much commission you are, like how much commission you're making. Not giving a shit about anything. If you left at 5 p.m., you were considered a piece of shit. Like, you're not a good worker. Like, think about that. Like, right? So, yeah, I can go on, but those were parts, a lot of the environments that I was in for most of my career.
Like you, as I advanced in the workplace, I developed these culturally assimilated ideas about what a successful man was. And it was someone that was workaholic and hard
Yeah,
driving. And I self identified hard driving. You think you're hard driving? Yo, Scott Mason's going to be harder driving than you. Match
yes.
this. And on and on and on, all this other sort of stuff. It sounds to me like things have changed, to say the least. Oh, what happened?
Yeah. Um, I have to say something. I'd be remiss if I didn't say that as a as a young person entering the workforce, and maybe especially in tech, there's a level of like, you have to have grit, you have to work hard. Like,
Yeah.
that's just part of it. There's a little bit there, but there's a balance. And I want to be clear that, like, I'm not saying working hard doesn't provide wealth and success. Of course it does, but it's how you do it, who you do it with, and the balance and understanding of like what's healthy and what's not. So I want to caveat that, because it's really important for maybe young listeners or people in the workforce, that like there's a level of hard work and grind that's important.
Well, I'm so glad you raised that, because we I've committed to the audience, and I commit to the audience again right now to keep it real and be honest.
Yeah,
It is true. If you want to achieve a certain level of success, you do have to work hard. I think
yeah,
it's a powerful point, and one that perhaps relates to where this conversation will ultimately go, which is that working hard may not itself be the problem. At least for me, it isn't the problem. I love to work, but what
yes,
are you working for? And what is the mental space within which you work? For instance, I work hard for Webdelics. Yo, it is a lot of work and I love it. And so I
Yes.
don't feel as though I am in a toxic space. I feel like I'm in a space in which I'm feeling a lot of joy and excitement all the time. That's a very different experience, and then one in which I'm just being an animal and a monster, not even human anymore, just pile driving through everything. Is that what you're talking about? Or are you talking about
Yeah,
something else?
exactly. It's purpose driven work. Same thing. Like I have a full time job. I advise these companies, and I'm building a business on the side. But that drives me. It excites me. It motivates me, and I'm very clear on my intentions of when I'm doing it, how I'm doing it, and when I spend time with my children and my wife, etc. So again, you're absolutely right. I couldn't agree with you more. So to answer your question, this shift, you probably have heard this a lot around the pandemic. Right before the pandemic, I started going to therapy, peeled back the layers of my psyche. It really helped me understand, why I thought the way I did, and it was beautiful, and it helped a lot, and it also shattered me in a really positive way because I knew I needed to work on myself. 2020 happened. We all know. We were living in a 700 square foot apartment in New York City. My wife was pregnant. My son was born in July of 2020. There were riots, protests, lockdowns, my wife healing, me being a new father, first time new father, um, aging parents, and a horrible, horrible toxic relationship at work, or
Mm,
toxic work environment.
mm,
And my whole world just came crumbling
mm.
down on me.
I'm so
Um,
sorry.
oh, thank you.
Mm,
It made me it I will be grateful for that because it pushed me to go get get help.
yeah.
I had to save my life at all intents and purposes. I don't necessarily mean like death, but I had to save my life. I had
Mm,
to save myself, my heart, my wife, my son, because if I didn't do it, it would have continued, and who knows what would have happened. That was the moment where I decided that I no longer want to work for anyone or companies or environments that are providing me this or giving me this much anxiety
mm,
and stress. It's just not worth it. So I started thinking about purpose driven work and what that means. And that's when plant medicine came. Like that's when I've always been into plant medicine and, on the maybe recreational, but 2020 was kind of my entrance into um, therapeutic or healing purposes with plant medicine. And I can talk about that, but from that, over the years, I changed my philosophy around what it means to be a leader. So if I can help myself to be a better leader, then I can help people in my environment who go on in the workforce or who go on to be leaders, and they are creating non-toxic environments. So I created a framework, a leadership framework that came from plant medicines, the journeys that I was in, and ceremonies, and that kind of these worlds intertwined. So yeah.
Talk to us a little bit about how exactly plant medicine came to change all of this for you. It sounds like the shift was nothing short of profound.
Yes. So 2020 was madness. I'd always heard about, the therapeutic purposes, the healing modalities of psychedelics, plant medicines, and always was intrigued. And around that time, Johns Hopkins had just raised some money, and they started the conscious department, the health, I forget the name, but the Department of Consciousness in Johns Hopkins. So I started getting immersing myself and just learning more and understanding that, um, podcasts, etc., reading. And the summer of 2021, I somehow through mutual friends and connections, I got connected to a healer, a facilitator who served 5-MeO, 5-MeO DMT. Never done it before, and and I decided this is it. I need to do it. So it was my first foray into psychedelics. True foray was 5-MeO DMT. This is pretty wild. Yep.
That's quite an entrance. Now, there are people who will be listening to this podcast for the very first time when
Yes.
they are watching or hearing this episode. Just in lay terms, explain to us what your understanding of 5-MeO is, and then talk to us a little bit about what that experience was like for you.
Yes. So I just want to caveat by saying that I'm not a scientist or an expert. I hang around a bunch of neuroscientists who are awesome and I learn from them. So I want to caveat that.
Yeah, thank
So
you.
5-MeO DMT has a methoxy group attached to it. It's the fifth position of the indole ring. And then DMT, which is just the compound dimethyltryptamine, doesn't have the 5-MeO. The 5-MeO part is primarily found in Bufo alvarius toad, or toad venom, and in some plants. And then DMT is found in a variety of plant species, and its major components part of the brew of ayahuasca. So that's my kind of high level of what 5-MeO is. And what 5-MeO does to the brain is really interesting. It interacts with the serotonin receptors in the brain. So, and I think most of us know, but serotonin influences mood, cognition, and perception. But 5-MeO, it binds to the 5-HT1A receptor, which is focused on coping with stress, anti-anxiety, and anti-aggression. So that's a really interesting thing to know about how and why 5-MeO like works the way it does. And it's very intense and it's short lasting.
And how do you take it?
So there's many ways: vaping or freebasing it, so just smoking it at high temperatures, and that's how I did it. It was freebased.
And what happened when you had this facilitated experience? Talk to us a little bit about what the experience was like, what the facilitator did, and then how you left it.
Yeah, this is wild, and this is also a warning to folks that integration matters. Integration is important. What you come out of when you come out of these experiences, they're profound to say the least, and they're disorienting. And having the right facilitator, understanding what happens afterwards and integrating into life, and taking time for yourself, and that's a whole nother conversation, why I've dedicated most of my time into the integration space. So I want to caveat that because that's so important with these powerful medicines. So I met this facilitator. She was like a traveling healer, and I'll never forget this. We met at the world famous Chelsea Hotel, and through some of her friends, she had a room or an apartment that she used, and it was Janis Joplin's apartment, who lived there, intact,
Wow.
furniture, like design. It was insane, and I grew up listening to Janis Joplin, so it just like it was beautiful,
That's
but it was also surreal.
yeah. I was going to say that's kind of crazy in the most awesome way possible. Please continue. I just had to say something. I just
It
couldn't
really is.
resist
It
it.
really is. It is absolutely crazy. So walked in and we had a ceremony. It was a prayer that I recited with her, and she sat in front of me, and there was also like an, she called her angel, but a facilitator there as well to be supportive. So she did a prayer with me, and I recited it, and essentially she said, "You're going to take a hit, and I'm going to slowly put you down on the ground, and then we're going to start playing the drums. If you continue to hear the drums, that means that you need a little more."
Mm.
So I got down on the ground, and I just felt this like overwhelming feeling of like heaviness, and it wasn't uncomfortable, just heavy. And I laid down and I moved my fingers. That was kind of her cue to tell me that I can still hear the music. And at that moment, when I took the second hit, I got blasted. I mean, it's so hard to explain, but I got blasted into the universe. I was shattered to a trillion pieces. I felt the creation of the universe,
Mm.
and I felt a presence with near me that I could only describe as God.
Mm.
And as I was in it, the facilitator later on told me that in the beginning, I kept saying, "I've been waiting for this my whole life." And I said that over and over and over again.
Mm.
And my life has not been the same since. I sat with it three more times that session. I wanted to keep going back.
Mhm.
Um, First time was beauty and astonishment and like, whoa, like what just happened? And I came out, I came back and opened my eyes, started laughing, crying. And I said, oh my God, I'm a father now.
Whoa.
And I said, I want to go back. I want another hit. I took another hit and went back to wherever I went. And thoughts of love and empathy towards my parents
Mm.
and the anger that I had towards them for the life that I wanted or I thought I wanted and how I wanted them to be kind of dissolved. And I was like, I appreciate everything you've done for me.
Mm.
I'm no longer angry. I get it. Thank you. And it was that moment when I realized that I had spent my whole life as an adult mainly looking at external things, external validations, external stuff, money, cars, house, whatever you want to put it. It was all external. And I thought that's what the meaning of life and success was, like
Mm.
accumulate.
Yes.
And I remember being like, oh my God, it's all internal. It's all within.
Mm.
I need to I never was taught or understood what that meant. It meant to look within. It meant to learn about me, who I am, what my values are, what my beliefs are. And that immediately went to that's it. That is what I need to teach my son. I'm going to teach him street smarts. I'm going to teach him the external stuff because those are important. But the number one thing I'm going to teach him is to look within. That is number one. Look within. Know thyself before you do anything else in your life, son. And it was just like this earth shattering, like, wow, yeah, one, I'm a father, and two, holy shit, like this is big. Yeah.
You know, it is so important for folks who are listening to or watching these episodes to get a grasp not just on the transformational impact that these substances can have, but how we get there.
Yeah.
Too often, people say, I don't understand what happens during the experience. And that breeds within a sense of fear or distrust of the process. I know, having felt things akin to what you're talking about during my own experience, how shattering it can be, how emotionally affecting it can be, and how hard it can be to describe, and how it can make you feel so naked and vulnerable when you do describe it. So I always want to, when someone does what you just did, take a second and honor it.
Yes.
Thank you for that, Saba.
Thank you. Thank you for the space.
Absolutely. What has been the aftermath of this for you?
Yeah. I'll talk about the last hit I took because I think this is an interesting segue. So I said I wanted to go again, and she said, "Are you sure?" And I said, "Yes." And she said, "I want you to be safe. This is the last one you can do today." Um, I took one more hit, and the best way I can explain is that I got stuck in the infinite void.
Mm.
It felt like, when old TVs are scrambled and I was
Mhm.
stuck in this void and I was just kept saying, oh my God, please bring me back. Please bring me
Mm.
back. Please forgive me. I'm so sorry for everything I did. Please forgive me. The hurt I caused the people in my life, um, the judgmental prick that I was, the condescending tones, the disregard for people's feelings and emotions, just not connecting in that way with people, and the profound love I had for my wife. And I just kept saying, I'm sorry, and please bring me back. And then and then I came back and I opened my eyes and I just started laughing. And I was like, I get it. I
Mm.
get it. And what's interesting about this is it was during Gay Pride. And so right outside, there's thousands of people outside. And the first thing that came to mind was this facilitator person that was here was a gay man. And I went and hugged him and I said, I'm sorry. I said, I'm sorry for people like me who put down or use derogatory terms like gay or, other stuff like that in a derogatory way. And I'm sorry. And just gave him a big hug. And I hugged a facilitator who's a woman. I said, I'm sorry for how I treated women in my past. I'm so sorry.
Circling back to the theme, and what a segue that is, rethinking what being a man is.
Yeah.
You know, in a lot of cultural contexts, to use a fancy word,
Yeah.
maybe a more common term might be in a lot of the environments that we grew up in, people grow up in now, especially young men, masculinity is
Yeah.
defined in opposition to other things rather than something intrinsic. So gay people are of extreme interest, pathological interest sometimes, I think, to many heterosexual men because that differentiation helps identify them as men. Similarly, diminishing or othering women or somehow separating themselves from the feminine helps define as a man. To me, as I've thought through this over the years, and particularly thinking through what I'm hearing as you speak, the experience that you had in no small part shattered that orb. The other thing that I have to say is striking me and that I'm feeling when I think about my own experience with psychedelics and connecting it to yours, right?
Yeah.
As psychedelics do, they connect us to each other, is that feeling of how could I have lived so long and
Mm.
understood so little? What has this meant for your son?
These last few years, like redefining of what it means to be a man, has been one of the most exciting and joyful things for me because in order for me to be a better father, a better man, I need to eliminate these decades, thousands of years of constructs that have been built around what it means to be a man. The most alpha manly men are so in tune with their feminine side. And that's what makes a real man.
Mm-hmm.
A real man shares his emotions. A real man cries. A real man talks about what's on his mind. I grew up in a world where that wasn't acceptable. Even till this day, when my son cries, my father is like, don't cry. Boys don't cry. And I'm just like, Dad, number one, he's a kid. And number two, that's not how it works. Like, that doesn't work in our household. Um, so I embraced that. I embraced that. I embraced fatherhood as a supporter to the feminine side and what it means to be a man. And my son, I like teach him. He is the most kind-hearted, sweetest, emotional boy I've ever known. Like he speaks his mind. He talks about his emotions. We do breath work together. Like it's pretty wild to me seeing him being such a like emotionally mature kid. And I thank myself and my wife, who's a brilliant human, but uh, I may have digressed. I apologize, but that's what fatherhood and manhood had changed for me. Like even with my relationship with women growing up, even with my dad. Like my dad was the classic like not, I don't want to say misogynist, but he always made sexual comments as jokes, even in front of my mom, and my mom would always like brush it off. And I grew up being like that, acting like that. And I'm like, wow, like I can't do that. Like that's not how you treat people. That's not how you treat women. I have a wife. I have a baby. I have a baby daughter who soon is going to be a woman. Like, what kind of role model am I going to be? I'm going to be her first true love as a man. Like, who am I going to be for her? So she doesn't go seek that. My kids don't go seek validation in the wrong places or from others. Again, know thyself. Your internal validation is all you need. And that's what manhood means. That's what fatherhood means. And that's what's been this massive shift for me with psychedelics and plant medicine.
If you were to have this exact same conversation, but in a room full of those that you worked with in the more toxic work
Yeah.
environments from your past, I would imagine that at least some of them might be recoiling inside or saying to themselves, I don't want my son growing up that way. Or he's given up so much. He's weak.
Hmm.
What would you say to them, Sabba?
I would say, I'm sorry. I'm sorry that you are holding back so much emotion in your life. Um, and I would tell them that I have never been stronger. I've never been more confident in myself as a man and as a human, and I've never been more successful as an executive, as an entrepreneur, as a salesperson. And the reason why is because I embraced my emotions. I embraced the feminine side of me, and I would encourage them to seek and go deeper. That brings up a really interesting thought because about 2 years ago, around this time, I did a closing statement for our yearly sales kickoff, and I went full emotion and talked about all of the things that have been on my mind and how I felt, and I cried. And there was a moment of like, oh man, what did I just do?
Mm-hmm.
What did I just
Yeah.
do in front of a bunch of strangers? And I'll never forget it. After that talk, my closing remarks, I got slacks, text messages, calls, and people saying, "You were so brave. Thank you. We didn't know like that this stuff was on your mind. Like you are a true leader." And I'm not saying this to boast, but it was really interesting because I felt so self conscious when I did that. Even years later, I've got messages from people. It was like I never forgot about that, and that you're the type of leader that I want to look for. So, so again, not boasting, but more along the lines of like taking that leap of faith of like being true, being authentic to yourself, and speaking your word. Your word is your bond. That's all that matters.
When we do the intros to these podcast episodes, one of the things that is said every time is that we are here to get rid of the myths about
Mm.
plant medicine and psychedelics. These myths don't just play out with regards to the substances themselves, but how they impact the way that we interact within the culture.
Yes.
So many times, and I would imagine that some of these men that we're talking about being in this hypothetical audience that we just mentioned a few minutes ago might secretly feel this way inside or have felt this way inside a zillion times. But fear or myths about what other people think keep them from going forward. Fears about what other people might have thought you were by doing psychedelics, by changing your career path, or by moving into a different way of being in the world emotionally could have kept you from fully embodying and having this sort of impact. To me, that goes as to the fundamental power of psychedelics and why what we're talking about here on the Webdelics podcast and the sharing that people like you do matter so very, very much. You've also had some experience in the psilocybin space. Let's talk briefly about that.
Yep,
And for no other reason than sometimes it can help people to understand various substances by comparing and contrasting them. Share.
absolutely. Sure. I think we'll start with kind of the scientific um, high level preview of the differences between 5-MeO and psilocybin. They're obviously, I shouldn't say obviously, they are they differ in chemical structure and natural sources. I already mentioned where 5-MeO primarily is found, and the effects of the brain are really interesting. So I'll touch again on what I mentioned earlier. 5-MeO primarily binds to the 5-HT1A receptor. So that's the receptor that copes with stress, anti-anxiety, anti-aggression. Now psilocybin also binds to the receptor, to the serotonin receptors, but to the 5-HT2A receptor. This receptor is responsible for more active coping, cognitive flexibility, so philosophical thoughts, mindfulness, etc., and creative thinking. So it's really interesting, kind of these two experiences. Again, 5-MeO generally more intense, shorter in duration. So you're feeling like profound, ineffable experience of non-duality, unity consciousness. And then psilocybin can, depending on dosage, but generally lasts several hours. More visual, emotional variability, deep personal philosophical issues. So back to the cognitive flexibility. Um, that has been an interesting perspective for me and shift, because I majority of my ceremonies, or when I journey, is with psilocybin. I believe it is the source code of this universe. These beautiful, beautiful medicines are live. There are entities, and I use them for so many reasons, because I know that once I sit with psilocybin, that once my prefrontal cortex is shut off, it's going to bring up all of these thoughts and emotions that I've been suppressing, that I need to confront, that I
Mhm.
want to confront in a loving, caring, non-judgmental space. That's not to say you can't get into a judgmental loops. That can happen with psilocybin, but setting and being in a right environment and all that stuff is important. So yeah, that's like kind of my high level understanding, and then also my experiences, which I can drill into.
We have discussed a lot. We could go on for hours.
Yes.
Sadly, our time together is coming to a close. Although, who knows? We might be back again one day. You just hinted
I
at it
would love to
yourself.
be I would love to be back on Webdelics, Scott. That would be awesome.
Thank you, Saba. We have gone through a lot. And with all of that in mind, there are so many takeaways from this. I don't even know where to begin. But let me just start by saying that one of the takeaways I got from you was actually in the last set of sentences that you just uttered, which was having an exploration of thoughts, emotions, as well as feeling states and things you need to confront within in a way that is loving. Thinking about the theme of today's episode. How many people, when they think about masculinity, being a man, think first and foremost about love?
Yes.
I know I wasn't raised that way. Rethinking love's place within my lexicon of manhood, and hopefully within the lexicon of manhood of every single person who's listening or watching, as well as those they interact with, is the takeaway that I would like to share and that will last with me, I believe, for a very long time. If you have one last thing that you want to say, Saba, or a summary takeaway that you'd like to share, go for
Yeah,
it.
I do. I would like to share, and I think this will kind of bring everything together. You just hit a few points. I want to leave the folks with the final thought, especially that hypothetical room of men who need to share their emotions. Confront all the heavy shit in your life head on. Most of us don't do this. We are scared. We are scared of the perceived repercussions. We are scared of the unknown. So we'd rather live in comfort of our trauma, in comfort of our pain, because we know it all too well. We know that space too well. I've been doing a metaphorical exercise for a long time now, which has been writing each thought on a card, whatever it is. I want to run away. I want to get divorced. I want kids. I want more kids. I want a new career, etc. And then I stare at it. I acknowledge it. I feel into whatever emotion comes up when I flip the card, and I feel it. And I yell, I cry, and I laugh. And I leave
Mm.
no card unturned. And only then, when we can be clear, free of those things, we thank them and we move on. When we detach from everything, it is then when we realize we have it all.
Man to man. But even more importantly, human to human,
Yes.
I will take that away and carry it with me, Sabba.
Thank you, Scott.
Sabba, how can any human being who is listening to or watching this not want to learn more about you? And how can they, when they feel that need, discover everything that you have out there in the world? Tell us.
Yes. Thank you, Scott. Anyone can reach out to me at any time. The two platforms that I spend most time on is LinkedIn, and it's just my name, Sabba Nazhand, Nazhand. And then my Instagram, which I post a lot of stuff around what we've talked about today, is Sabba, Sabba underscore get, Get, Zen, Zehn. And those are two places. Reach out to me, DM me, happy to talk. But thank you, Scott. This has been a pleasure being on Webdelics today.
Thank you. For those of you who are listening or watching, keep tuning in. We have an amazing series of episodes about psilocybin, magic mushrooms, so called, coming up. They are going to be revelatory, they're going to be insightful, and they are going to be credible as well. I am very excited about sharing them with you. And if you enjoyed today's episode and want to learn more, be sure to subscribe to our podcast on your favorite audio platform or on YouTube. And for heaven's sake, leave us a 5-star review on Spotify, Apple, or your favorite audio platform, and comment on the episode in YouTube. We love hearing from you and want to hear what you have to say. Also, don't forget to tell all the folks who you care about everything that we're doing here at Webdelics. We want to pass the word on and share the changes and the positive outcomes, just like Sabba was able to do with you today. Don't forget to follow Webdelics on all of our social media platforms, Instagram, Facebook, LinkedIn. Then go to our website, webdelics.com. That's Webdelics.com. Subscribe to our blog for detailed, credible, vetted information about psychedelics that you can rely on. And above all else, make sure that you come back for the next episode of the Webdelics Podcast.